Welcome back to another lecture on speech processing. In this lecture, we will look at speech corpora and annotation. So let's get rolling here. Okay. So corpus is a Latin word for body, and a corpus in linguistics is a collection of text or sound files or sound files, and the plural is corpora. Okay. And you can have various types of corpora. You can have written or text corpora, or you can have speech corpora, which we will see a lot of. And you can even have gestures. You can even have like animal corpora, which I'll show you an example or two. You can also have videos, that a collection of videos, that's a corpus as well, or even a corpus of images. And you can have various levels of annotation, that is extra information that is given with the corpus. It can be from just raw, unannotated, like that is no annotation at all, to a lot of annotation to help the researcher or the user of the corpus to know what the different files are and how to use the corpus. There are different schemes as well as standards and conventions that have been proposed to kind of conventionalize or standardize corpora. You can have structured or like aligned or annotated or tree banks with like a hierarchy. And there's a whole range of different corpora for different language, human language, as well as, like I said, even animal communication sounds. So what is the purpose of corpora? Well, in the top right of this slide, we see a concordance line of some Arabic there. And they can be used for many different applications in language studies or language fields, like language instruction. You can use a corpus of native speech or writing to teach second language learners of a language, and so they can see, get a feel for how the language is used. Task analysis, natural language processing, NLP, systems development, that obviously is really important. Corpora are really important for training NLP systems and for doing testing and evaluation purposes of those systems. You can create knowledge source development, like dictionaries and lexicons of languages, like documenting languages that are spoken by few people. You create, a corpus of everything you can about that language and create a lexicon based on that corpus or small corpus. And obviously linguistic research. Just about anyone who's doing research with empirical language data is using a collection of materials, which we could call a corpus. Sources for speech corpora. Well, here are a couple that I have. The LDC is a linguistic data consortium housed at the University of Pennsylvania and is a big clearinghouse or kind of digital warehouse of materials. The NIST, National Institute for Standards and Technology, and the ELRA is the European Language Resources Association, I believe. Those are big clearinghouses. And there are other dedicated portals that have language data. You can click on these links and follow them. For example, I'll just real quick click on Open SLR right there. Is a site devoted to hosting speech and language resources for training corpora, such as training corpora for speech recognition, etc. Okay. Kaggle is just kind of a data science-oriented type site that has a lot of data sets. And Hugging Face is a big growing site for machine learning models that you can find data on there as well. So specialized collections of corpora, special interest groups you can find online as well, like the Association for Computational Linguistics, ACL, for example. And even the web itself, right, can be a source of linguistic data and speech data, right? For example, YouTube. Grabbing a bunch of YouTube videos is a source of speech. And if you haven't seen this TED Talk from a linguist, he shows how he recorded his in his house for how many hours? 90,000 hours of home video. Anyway, to understand how his infant son learned language. It's an interesting video. He had cameras and microphones all around his house to study I guess, the L1 acquisition of his son, this MIT researcher, Deb Roy. Take a watch on that later. Okay. Speech corpora, samples of spoken data, right? It can vary by the language that is spoken. It can vary by the speaker, the type of speaker, right? Gender and emotions and age and all sorts of socio-demographic information, right, can vary according to the speakers. The content or like the register that's being used in the speech obviously is going to vary depending on the function that the language is being used for. The recording and transmission device, whether it's a nice studio quality sound or is it just kind of an ambient microphone that's picking up things happening around the conversation. Okay, so the LDC, let's take a quick look here. The LDC is a consortium or like a clearinghouse of language data resources. Like I mentioned, hosted at the University of Pennsylvania. And BYU has been a subscribing member of the LDC for more than the past 2 decades. And so we have access to a lot of their resources. We have a certain quota per year that we can request data sets. And we have a lot of data sets that we have already requested. Like I mentioned previously, if you find a data set on the LDC's website, approach me about whether we already have that data set and I can get it to you, or perhaps we can request it. So you can do that for research and classwork and theses and honors theses or undergraduate research awards, right? And you obviously need to obey the distribution conditions, and which usually means don't make it available to the world. There's a signed agreement on many of these. So you can browse the database here. I have a link on my slide. And if you go to search here, the 4th button there, and then this keyword search right here, right? If I were to search if I search for elephant, here's a corpus of elephant vocalizations. Now, obviously, this is not meant for the main purpose of LDC is to study human languages, but I thought that was interesting, and I discovered that. But if I search for Spanish or there's a language drop down, you can do that. Anyway, big clearinghouse of linguistic data, including speech corpora. Okay. So let's take an example. Look at some sample LDC speech corpora. There's broadcast news, there's field recordings, there's speech within like group meetings, there's microphone conversation speech, that's really good quality. There's telephone conversations. There's a popular corpus called the switchboard corpus, which was created by just having volunteers talk to each other on the phone. And these are often transcribed already into text. And so it's easy to search for certain words or certain linguistic constructions that you may be interested in. So here are the top 10 corpora on LDC. Let me click on that and we can take a quick look there. You can see that several deal with speech, timid, T digits, and switchboard there. This one, Selex 2, is kind of speech related. Contains the Selex English, Dutch, German. Right, it has phonology, phonetic transcriptions, and it's really well annotated. Anyway, so a lot of materials there. You can take a look as you would like. I encourage you to do so. And so what are some of the characteristics of speech corpora? Well, you need to know which languages are being used, obviously. You need to know the medium through which the corpus was created and like the context or setting. Was it a nice microphone setup, perhaps even a studio, microphone with really good quality audio, or was it more of like a group conversation with a lot of overlap and overtalk where speakers talk over each other a bit? Was it cell phone or telephone data speech, which has lower quality audio? And what are the kinds of speakers in the corpus? Are they adult L1 speakers? Are they adult L2 speakers? Are they children? Are they perhaps people with speech difficulties like aphasia or dementia? Or even deaf speech, the acoustic speech of deaf people. And what is the task or domain that was in the corpus Was it like air traffic controllers, or was it in a classroom with the teacher and students? Was it just casual conversation between friends at over lunch, or is it in a library? So looking at the task or the domain in which the corpus was created is important, and the ambient conditions obviously is tied to that as well. And what is the coverage? Does it claim to cover American English, or does it claim to be very specific to this one little register within a certain language? For example, air traffic controllers, it's a very specific thing. Are there any associated tools that come with the corpus? Often some of the corpora come with some software tool to convert from the audio format that they come in to kind of more standard ones. For example, there's a Sphere command line tool that allows you to convert from Sphere audio files to WAV or other formats. And often the corpora will say, what is the recommended application of this corpus? Some will say this was created in order to train a ASR system, that is an automated speech recognition system, or this corpus was used or can be used to train customer support people so they can hear how to, interact with customers on the phone. Sometimes they'll say what a possible recommended application of a corpus is. And then you need to know what type of files or encodings the transcripts are, and as well as the audio files, like I mentioned, you may need to convert. And also which annotations are available or already there. And then the bottom two bullets here, if there are any distribution restrictions like copyright or restrictions, or if it's open source, and also there's a cost. Again, a lot of those corpora are really expensive, and so that's why you need to approach me if you want to use one of them on LDC at least. There can be different levels of transcription detail in annotations in corpus files. You can have turn level taking. In my previous lecture, I had an example of where each turn was written down on a separate line. You can have utterance level annotations, that is one line is one utterance. Or you can have word level annotation, or even down to the phoneme. That's the case with Buckeye corpus. You can have a phoneme by phoneme transcription of what's called the Buckeye corpus from Central Ohio. So we'll see different types of annotations, conventions for transcription next week. And having time-aligned stamps, like timestamps, is hugely important for speech processing and necessary for speech processing. So ambient noise, you need to be aware of ambient noise in a speech corpus, right? There's door slamming or sirens, or if it's a cockpit noise, if it's like a air traffic control corpus. I created a corpus in California where one interview had a noisy lawnmower outside the window, even though it was in a sound studio. There was a noisy lawnmower outside the window that was picked up by the microphone. Anyway, so being aware of that and trying to minimize, if you're creating your own corpus, trying to minimize those background noises is useful. And on campus here at BYU, we have access to several sound booths, including one here in the JFSB. And then you need to know the conversational context, who's participating. Is it face-to-face, or is it through some other medium like a telephone or maybe a Zoom. I think there are now corporate Zoom calls. And also being aware of the weather if you can. Weather can change voices sometimes, like cold weather, or obviously cold weather may lead into sickness, which obviously can affect the voice. And knowing what building or where the context of the conversation happened, whether it's in a classroom or a hospital or at a restaurant, which can be noisy, or shopping centers, or in a jungle with all the background noise. There are corpora of speech in jungles. So let's take a look at speaker characteristics. Knowing all these things about the speakers is important and can affect the speech that is used and how it's used, including the last bullet there, the hierarchical relationship. You can just think, right? That's just simply a diastratic difference in speech, in language, that if you're speaking to someone who's like above you in authority or seniority or something in some hierarchy, that your speech will be affected in comparison to when you're speaking to someone who's like below you, or a good friend or a family member you're comfortable with. The emotional state, right, obviously affects your language, whether you're angry or happy or sad or bored or, whatever. These factors, right, are important in studying speech and can affect the speech that's used. Disfluencies. Now, disfluencies are like false starts and other things that you don't usually see in writing. We don't write whatever, we don't actually write down that stuff. But up to 20% of speech can include disfluencies, that like those false starts and the ums, right? In English, we say or In Spanish, it's often este or e is usually used. In Danish, I understand it's the front mid vowel. Those are very much a part of speech, right? And so you need to be aware of that and deal with that and make decisions on how to transcribe that. If you what to transcribe, how much to transcribe of that type of stuff, and also be aware of those disfluencies when creating automated speech recognition models. Interruptions and laughs and grunts and breaths and things that are hard to transcribe, like How would you transcribe I don't know. Is there a conventional way? Should I write down my conventional way of transcribing affirmative versus right? So I'm giving you these examples of things that we don't think of much if we're looking at writing or writing things down, writing papers. But in speech, when you're analyzing speech, these are very much an important part of the way you approach the analysis of speech. Filled pauses, right? So annotating prosody, that is up and down, rising and falling intonation and pitches and rhythm and stress, right? And so there are many different schemes, and the Toby is probably the most common one that you may have seen in the study of linguistics, and it uses exclamation or asterisks and plus signs and percent signs to indicate different parts of the intonation pattern or the prosody. And here are some links I have to information about Toby you can look at, as well as this is from MIT University about Toby there. You can take some time to look through that. Here's an example on the bottom, on the right, both top right and bottom right of this slide have examples of the way to annotate prosody in writing. Other kinds of annotation, perhaps in some situation, it may be useful to know the gestures that are used. If I hold my hands up like this, let me get my hands into my screen. If I hold my hands up like this, that kind of means something. Like, I don't know, that means something. And if you're transcribing someone speaking and they do that, it may be important to annotate that. I think gaze, the amount of gaze, eye gaze is important as well. It can be important. It can be meaningful to a conversation. Okay. So TalkBank is another kind of big repository of corpora that I haven't mentioned yet. And they have all sorts of kinds of speech there. They have conversation, they have adult and classroom interactions, they have child language, like language acquisition, as well as disorders, and clinical speech, like speech of people with aphasia or autism or traumatic brain injury. Let me just show you real quick. Click on the link there, and let me zoom in. Created at Carnegie Mellon University. The child's one here, for example, if I jump in here and just do browsable database real quick, and this is children. So let me I think this is North American English right here. Go to Brown. How about E. Brown? I have a daughter named E. Brown, but this is not my daughter. And if you just look at it, you can see a conversation. So the CHI is the child. Here's the mother. Hi, David. Hi, Eve. How are you this morning? Let's go down to child. Yeah. Is the. You can see that they're annotating that the child pronounced the as D. So anyway, take a look at this corpus, another corpora in there. And there are different kind of formats, different annotation schemes that are used with some of those corpora there. And they have tutorials as well and a lot of good information in this TalkBank corpus. Or it's a repository of corpora, really. You can also have signed language corpora, right, which have video or still pictures of various positions of hands. So here's some examples. This is from Boston University, the National Center for Sign Language and Gesture Resources. And they have a link to a corpus at Rutgers University. Let's see if it goes quickly there. It's not going quickly. I think I have a link here to it. You could search, for something. Let me just search for the word book, for example. And if I click on occurrences here, you can watch a little snippet of somebody signing something. I don't know ASL well enough. I took first semester ASL back in the day, and I don't remember a whole lot. But there are corpora of sign languages. And here's a recent book that came out pretty recently, Sign Language Corpora. This is a book, a revolutionary contribution to the field of sign language linguistics, the first volume to provide a comprehensive overview of the creation, development, and use of sign language corpora. So, yeah, there are, sign language corpora, and they have glosses. Like here are some glosses. Once, this is past tense, personal pronoun, first person's personal pronoun, drive, which will be translated into English as once I was driving, right? And these are glosses, just one word, little bits of information about what these signs mean, and then the translation is the thing below it. So yeah, and having information about the spatial reference, is a sign like in front of the chest, or maybe down below, like in front of the stomach, or up near the head. I think this is boy, I remember from ASL 101. So having all that information is important for a sign language. And so in the creation process of a corpus, you need to, think about what information would be important for the end user of the corpus. And down here at the bottom, I have an example of some annotations from a sign language corpus. Path of suitcases to suitcase, pick up and place suitcase, path of suitcase, so it's kind of sign the path of the suitcase. Anyway, so a lot of cool annotation can go into a sign language corpus. Here's some miscellaneous corpora. There are corpora of animal vocalizations, like animal communication, like vervant monkeys. Here's a corpus of field recordings of vervant monkey calls that was recorded, I don't know where, but so if somebody wanted to study this, it's not human language, obviously, but communication. There is a corpus of Asian and elephant vocalizations, 57 hours of audio recordings of vocalizations of Asian elephants. So there's even corpora of robotic speech, and trying to that can be used to try to train, some model to recognize robotic speech, and also try to increase the emotion that robotic speech can put into their speech, improving the robotic sound of speech that robots or digital assistants have, and clinical videos, again with people with aphasia or speech problems. Those can be used to study and help, and therefore help people with those problems. You can have corpora of images, and then even lip reading in the wild. Here's a corpus or data set of lip reading here in the UK, on this website. So yeah, there's quite a few corpora out there in the world. And an important part of annotation is XML. XML is a way to format data that can be easily read by a computer. And you can create your own. Obviously, XML is you're able to create your own markup, your tags and whatnot. And so here are some various examples of specific prosodic manipulation of synthesis engines. We have speech synthesis markup language here. and some others there. I'll let you look through those. Take some time to look through those, skim those. And let me talk for a second about speech annotation tools. It allows users to provide information, to store and provide information about the speech or the video or the speech in the video, right? And including separating speech segments into either utterances or down to words, phonemes, like I mentioned before, and divide them into different speakers in the conversation, different tiers for each speaker. And again, you can also annotate other gestures or super segmentals like intonation and pitch and whatnot. And the cool thing is you can often export these, what you do in one program, out to another program, then do something else. And so, for example, you can use Elon to do manual transcription of an interview and export it out to Pratt to do acoustic analysis. And so you got familiar with or starting to get familiar with Pratt starting in Lab 2, right? And Elon is a transcription tool, a manual transcription tool. It's not ASR. And there's some others here, Xmeralda, Transcriber, Xtrans, and Transcriber, AG. You should take some time to just skim through those. And Elon, for example, Elon, that second one I mentioned, is really, really powerful. It allows you to segment down to the phone or down to the utterance level. It can also detect speech, or like silence versus speech, which sounds trivial, but it actually is important for creating automated speech recognition models, for example. Speech diarization, like separating out two different speakers out of an audio file. All sorts of tools in Elon, and I encourage you to look at that tool. So the next lab, Lab 3, is to look at the different annotation schemes that are used in various corpora and to look at a bunch of samples of corpora on the LDC site. Now, I'm going to point out that it's the samples and not the actual corpus. Like, don't try and download the whole corpus. Again, that would be super expensive. But they often have samples that you can look at. And try and find many different speech-related files and annotation schemes that you find. You're going to become a speech corpus wizard and understand the content, the structure, and the annotation types and formats. Okay, so how to prepare for that lecture? Well, follow some of the links that I've presented in this presentation here that I have my slides linked to on the CMS, and perhaps do your own web searches about speech corpora. All right, so we'll see you then.